hear you, in your words, tell us why you hate those people. Tell us why you want to grind them and take them out of Iowa, because that's what this does. It pushes them out.
Point of order has been requested. Senator, state your point.
Can we get back to the bill?
Senator Bisignano, I'd encourage you to stay on topic, please. Thank you.
Shame on you, Christians.
Chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Walz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Schultz yield to some more questions?
Senator Schultz, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Walz, you are in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Schultz, in your response to the introduction of Senate Amendment 3012, I'm trying to get some more clarity from you on the actual impact of this amendment to the bill if it were taken up. I mean, do you think that it is morally right to deny somebody a credit card or a personal loan based exclusively on the fact that they are or are perceived to be transgender?
That's the question?
Yeah.
I think that it is our prerogative as the state legislature to put forth a policy that protects men, women, children, and protects taxpayers. And the way you do that is to officially put forward a consistent language in a bill that makes the intent clear that the protection of women, children, boys, little boys, is a state prerogative.
So do you think that it is morally right to deny somebody a credit card or a personal loan based only on the fact that they are or are perceived to be transgender?
I resist anybody discriminating against anybody, assaulting anybody, doing anything wrong against anybody. But this bill addresses protecting women and children and taxpayers, and it is going to go forward in a manner which will not lend itself to a duplicitous message of here or there different policies. We're going to remove the words gender identity from code, as I said, and we are resisting this amendment for consistency.
So you're okay with denying somebody access to a credit card or a personal loan? Senator, that's what this amendment fixes.
You are putting words in my mouth, as you are wont to do. We have had this more times. You tried to trap me with a Ronald Reagan quote that I wouldn't play with. You won't put words in my mouth. The message is we are going to put together a straightforward, easy to understand, not duplicitous message bill that protects women and children and taxpayers.
Senator, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to get an answer from you. Because you're not answering the question. The question is, do you think it is morally right to deny someone access to credit because they are or are perceived to be transgender? And you won't say yes or no.
I am saying that we have 28 states without this language in their codes, and we don't have a problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Senator Schultz. Look, the refusal by Senator Schultz to deliver a yes or no answer to a simple question, which is whether or not you believe it is a morally correct and should be a state-sanctioned decision to discriminate against an Iowan in their attempts to access credit because they are or are perceived to be transgender, underscores what this is all about, Mr. President. If the senator from Crawford County believes that that is wrong, I would hope that he would reverse his position and join me in voting in support of Senate Amendment 3012. If the senator from Crawford believes that it is morally correct to deny transgender Iowans access to credit because they are or are perceived to be transgender, he should have the courage of his convictions to say that on the floor of the state Senate. The refusal to actually answer the question, to actually engage in debate and conversation on this topic is beneath the dignity of this chamber. Mr. President, this is serious stuff. And this line is not an answer at all. It's not.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Blake, for final remarks on Amendment 3012 to Senate File 418.
Let me explain the impact of what this amendment, if it's voted down, will happen on Iowans in this state. The only thing that is keeping banks and financial institutions from being able to prejudice on the basis of gender identity is a federal rule. Not a law, not a court case, it's a rule. And it is at the whim of a president that's hanging up behind you on whether that rule stays in effect. And there has already been rules put in place and executive orders put in place that are rolling back the protections for those with gender identity through across the nation. So the fact that this rule at the federal level even has some level of existing, I give it a snowball's chance in hell that it lasts by the end of the year. So the one thing in our state that will have any defense related to allowing to have Iowans have access to credit is this law. And so when you sit here and tell us that you're trying to protect women and trying to protect women, what does this do to protect those folks? What we're doing is shutting off credit to people. That is what this does. So be honest with us, please, about what is the point. And so I ask, Mr. President, I move the amendment and ask for a record roll call vote on this, on the amendment S 3012.
A record roll call has been requested. The secretary will open the voting system and receive your vote. Senator Webster votes no. Has every senator voted? Every senator has voted. The secretary will close the voting system. The secretary will lock the voting system and record your votes. The Senate will pay attention to the results of the roll call. Those voting aye, 15. Those voting no, 33. The amendment is defeated. Just a point, Senate rules prohibit the gallery from commenting or talking or cheering or jeering or doing anything to disrupt the decorum of the Senate. The chair calls up amendment number S3013 to Senate File 418 and recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Blake, for opening remarks on amendment 3013.
This bill, and I'm sure the Republicans saw this coming, with this bill, what it does is remove the strike related to the protections for those with gender identity related to housing. Again, and this is an essential protection for individuals to the right of shelter and the ability to live in our state. For that reason, I implore everybody to support this amendment. Thank you.
Is there discussion on the amendment? Senator Schultz. The chair recognizes the senator from Crawford, Senator Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the same reasoning would make me ask you to resist this amendment again. The bill is written as a whole, and I ask that we do not accept this amendment.
Rule 18, there's been a call to the Senate. All senators are requested to remain in the Senate chamber for the duration of the debate this afternoon. The chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Blake. I really appreciate this amendment because it speaks to what Iowans have been subjected to in the past and can be subjected to without civil rights protections. And once again, I just have to say that it is outrageous that you even have to file this amendment because this entire bill is outrageous. Iowa should not become the first state in the nation to remove an entire group of people from civil rights protections. However, since Iowa Republicans have insisted upon calling this bill forward, we need to hear the words of one of our colleagues in the House. I want you to listen to the experiences of Representative Amy Wichtendahl, somebody who I've known since college, somebody I've worked with in the private sector, and somebody who I call a good friend. What I want you to think about is her experience, and I'm going to read her words to you. Have you ever had to look into your 3-year-old's eyes and explain to him why he doesn't have a house? Have to explain to him why he's now living with strangers and what happened to his room and all of his toys? Have you ever had to do that? Amy has. The same week I transitioned on the job, these are Amy's words, I received a letter from my property manager that I had 30 days to move. I had always paid my rent on time. The unit next to mine sat empty for 6 months, and they would not tell me the real reason they wanted me gone. No attempt to secure a new lease, just 30 days, get out. Do you know the humiliation of losing your home? I pray that you never do, and I never want that for anyone. This bill revokes our protections to our jobs, our homes, and our ability to ask credit. In other words, it deprives us of our life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. Please support the amendment before us today.
The chair recognizes the senator from Black Hawk, Senator Dotzler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, here we go. The last amendment, and we're resisting it. What really gets me is what has happened about a call for the Senate. I mean, not a call for the Senate, but it called for a time certain, which required us to do a call for the Senate because we only have so long to express ourselves, and with members out of the chamber, that eats the time up. That's the reason for that. I've been in the legislature for 29 years. And it's been policies, and when I was in the House and on a bill here where you kind of paper a bill. You try to put a bunch of amendments up to take time up, to wear people down, and that isn't what was occurring here. We had 3 amendments. 3 amendments that were key to this bill. And we have debate shut off. And I ask the question, why? Are you afraid to hear the truth? Are you afraid that somebody's going to ask you to get up and explain your position on this amendment? You use a typical trick to get something through. Hold a subcommittee in the morning, hold a full committee later that day, and then have a debate as soon as possible so the public doesn't have a chance to get worked up. Well, listen, they're worked up. In my 29 years of being here, I have never seen the majority party abuse a time certain like this. This is a full workday. We weren't planning on running a million amendments.
Point of order has been called. What's your point? He went to tell someone that have to cancel the meetings because we've been restricted to the chamber.
You got staff for that.
Senator Dotzler, continue, please.
Never in my time in the Senate has this ever been done. And it's because you don't want to hear the truth. You don't want to keep talking about it. You know, when I was in control and our team as Democrats were controlling this chamber for 10 years, we listened to everything you had to say. We went through every amendment, and we never put a muzzle on you. So here we are in this. It's pretty clear where you're coming from, and I know most of you very well. And I'm actually shocked of where you're going with this. This morning, I listened to a prayer, and Jesus' name was brought up. And I know we have prayer groups here, and you go in and study the Bible. Well, evidently, you skip some of the paragraphs in some of the areas, because you wouldn't be treating people like this. And you put your hands over your heart this morning like I did and recited the Pledge of Allegiance. And what does that say at the very end? What does it say? You all know that. For liberty and justice for all. Try to tell me that transgender people aren't people and they don't deserve liberty and justice. Try to tell me that, and try to tell yourself that. And look what you're going to do. You're going to, and it's you, this state is going to become the first state in the nation to back up on civil rights. You get to carry that honor with you as long as you live, because you're going to take the votes to do it. When I go to my grave, I will not have to face that. It's you and your individual votes. And how could you do it? I know you personally. You're a lot of their good people here. And you follow along with some kind of political agenda to win more seats? For God's sake, there's only 16 of us. How many more you need to fool Iowans?
Point of order has been requested. State your point, Senator Evans.
I request that the topic be addressed in the debate. We're wandering away from the amendment at hand.
Senator Dotzler, I'll repeat a second time. Let's confine our remarks to the content of the bill.
Well, I was talking about the amendment. I was hoping you'd listen and finally do something to help at least mitigate the problems of this bill. You've turned down 2 amendments. You're about to turn down this one. And is anything more important than housing? Is there anything more important than shelter? I was standing in the middle of that rally downstairs, and a Latino family came up to me, a mother and her children, and she said, "I'm worried about what's next. Are they going to throw me out of my house eventually and my home?" I had a trans woman, I guess she sent me an email about telling me to do something, walk out of the place, just do something crazy. Now, I'm tired of just speeches. You need to do something. And I told her through an email that there's no stopping this. It's going to come. She said, I'm so worried about me being kicked out of my home because this is something that they can now discriminate against, and it's okay. You realize what this stuff says? It's okay to do this. The legislature gets to decide, and it's all right. Senator Schultz, I don't see what this has to do with protecting people in their restrooms, in their locker rooms, and children by kicking people out of their homes and discriminating against them to even get into a place because I don't like how you look. That's not Iowa. That's supposed to be Iowa nice. So much for that. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Blake.
Of my closing, explaining what is about to happen to Iowans if this amendment is not passed. At the federal level, there is one protection related to housing, and it's really the fair housing. The only way, the extension of that to those that are trans and those with gender identity is based on guidance that was provided under the Biden administration. What exists now is we already have a Trump administration that has likely rescinded that. It may not be a specific memo, but I would contest that federal protection is probably out the door. So, if this amendment is not passed through in the state of Iowa, because there is no federal counterpart related to this, is individuals that are trans or individuals that have gender identity issues, even just cisgender individuals, straight individuals that look more feminine or look more masculine, could be discriminated against in the state of Iowa because we aren't putting this amendment back and creating this protection, Mr. President. That is the repercussions of not putting this back in. Again, as has been said before, what does this have to do with protecting people in bathrooms? We are potentially denying folks who are just wanting to exist from being able to enter and get a home based on their status of who they are. So that please, at least for shelter, please pass this. For that, I move the amendment, Mr. President, and ask for a record roll call vote.
The senator from Polk, Senator Blake, moves the adoption of Senate Amendment 3013 to Senate File 418. Record roll call has been requested. The secretary will open the voting system and receive your vote. Senator DeWitt votes no. Has every senator voted? Every senator has voted. The secretary will close the voting system. The secretary will lock the voting system and record your votes. The Senate will pay attention to the results of the roll call. Those voting aye, 15. Those voting no, 33. The amendment is defeated. This disposes of all amendments. We are now back on Senate File 418. Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Blake.
Thank you. Thank you to the Republicans for making it abundantly clear what this bill is for. We just provided 3 opportunities to put protections back in place that relate to things that do nothing related to the issues brought up today about protecting whatever. We provided 3 opportunities to add housing, to add employment, to add access to credit back into statute. But what we got instead was a clear message of what this intent of this bill is. This is meant to utterly remove, utterly eradicate gender identity from Iowa. This isn't meant to protect anybody. It's not. If it was meant to protect somebody, we would have narrowed the scope of this bill just now. We would have kept the protections in place to allow Iowans to still have right to housing, to employment, and to credit. If this was meant about protecting folks, we would still be protecting Iowans. But instead, it has been made abundantly clear that we want, not we, the Republicans, want to remove trans Iowans from Iowa. They want to make it difficult to live in this state. They want to make it that you can be discriminated when you walk in and you're trying to apply for housing. That if you look a little bit different, that if you identify in a different way, you will be denied, or you could be. Never in the history of the United States that rights that have been granted to a people have been stripped away like this. Never. And the argument that was made earlier, that the reason for this bill is because there is this conflict within law. That is a bunch of poppycock. Why? Because the way that statutory interpretation occurs is that when there is a conflict in bill, the most recent bill controls. So all these bills that have already done all the things that you want to do related to protections would likely have already amended the Civil Rights Act. So they already have the force of law. This is an entirely unnecessary step. This is pushing on a group of minority of people and pushing them down. There is already these protections in place. There is no conflict. The bills that were passed a few years ago control. These protections are in place. So instead, what we have is this bill in front of us. And let me explain a little bit more, too, related to what the Civil Rights Act does. Because I've heard from time to time that the point of this is to elevate the rights of others. It's to elevate a certain group above all others. And that, pardon my French, is bullshit. What it does...
Point of order has been called.
All right.
Senator Zumbaugh, state your point.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the Iowa Senate, and I don't appreciate the profanity in a very serious discussion. So, Senator,
Okay.
please.
I will
keep that to
refrain
them.
from swearing moving forward.
Senator Blake, that is expressly prohibited
Yes,
by the Senate rules. Please refrain.
I will
Carry
refrain.
on.
When it comes to the civil rights and what that law does, it doesn't elevate any rights over the other. What it does, it gives people the right to enter the room in the first place. So if I, a straight white male, were to apply, and a trans individual were to apply for the same job, it's not giving them preference over me, it's making sure that they have the right to be heard in the first place. My credentials versus theirs would still have to control. But it makes sure that that individual has the right to be in that interview in the first place. And when you remove these protections and you remove that, you are keeping a certain group of people out of this discussion because becomes a permissible part of the law in the state of Iowa. There was also discussion earlier related to mutable traits. Again, there are parts of our code that are not immutable. Religion and disability. Religion is not something that is innate to a person. Yes, you may believe you do that, but that is not something that is an immutable characteristic to yourself. And disability could be something you're born with or gain later in life. So to use that argument that this is an immutable trait tends to forget that there are other protections in the law. And I've hinted at this before. This goes beyond just trans individuals. This impacts all Iowans. All Iowans will be subject to new levels of discrimination throughout this state. If somebody happens to be more effeminate, or if somebody happens to be more masculine, they can now be based and characterized and discriminated based on those characteristics. So if I were to go into an employment and someplace and somebody thought I was just too pretty for that job, they could base their employment not based on my credentials, but based on what my identity within the gender is. So this has far more sweeping effect than just a small minority of folks. This impacts all Iowans with an incredible scope of unintended consequences that allows discrimination on a wide variety of different levels. You know, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what this means. We have multiple times this week gotten up and talked about the sterling history of the civil rights of this state. We have talked about over 150 years of all the firsts that Iowa has brought forward. And when we talk about the history of the state, and when people talk about 100 years from now, our versions of ourselves 100 years from now, when they talk about that history, this is going to be a black spot. Because history, if you look through it, talks about the forward progress of humanity. Honestly, what will be remembered 100 years from now is this vote. If you go back 100 years, can you talk about the tax policy, the marginal tax rate that occurred, what the property tax rates were at that time? No. But we can sound off about all the firsts that occurred because history remembers these moments. So when you go vote later today on this bill, this will be the legacy of this body. Many of you will not be remembered for a single other thing other than this vote. And this legacy of what that vote will be one of tarnishing our sterling record in the state of Iowa. This is not the history that we should be writing in Iowa, that a group of individuals in a severe minority, that the tyranny of the majority decided to put their thumb on them and say, you do not belong. You should not exist. You should not be a part of our culture. You should not be a part of the state of Iowa. You should not be here. We want to remove you from our spaces. We want to take you from where we want you. We don't even want to remember you.
Point of order has been called. Senator Dawson, state your point.
Mr. President, Rule 9, the senator shall confine all remarks to the questions under debate and shall avoid implication of improper motives.
Senator Blake, this is the third time I've had to call that on the caucus. Please refrain from those types of comments.
About history and legacy?
About motives.
I didn't bring forward this bill. For that, I ask people to please vote down this bill.
The chair recognizes the senator from Story, Senator Quirmbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to what is perhaps the single cruelest bill that I've seen in my 23 years in the Iowa Senate. Let's be clear what it is and what it isn't. You will no doubt hear rhetoric about bathrooms, but that was an issue that was dealt with in other legislation several years back. You will no doubt also hear rhetoric about high school sports. That also is an issue that was dealt with several years ago in other legislation. This bill is far broader, far more dangerous. It seeks to legalize discrimination against transgender people, to legalize discrimination in housing, to legalize employment discrimination, to legalize credit discrimination, to legalize discrimination in other areas against our transgender friends, neighbors, and families. What exactly is it that transgender people have done to deserve this discrimination, this denial of basic human rights? The bill talks about transgender theory. Well, I want you to understand, transgender is not a theory. Transgender are real people. People that you know, I think, and people that I know. They are our friends, neighbors, and family. So let's think about those real people. Let me introduce you to one. I have a friend named Lily. I met her a couple years ago when we were discussing a similarly obnoxious bill going after transgender people. she showed up to testify against that bill. She was a little nervous that day. She sat on her mother's lap because Lily was only 7 years old. But she had prepared a speech, and she gave me a copy, and I will read it for you. Hello, my name is Lily. I'm a 7-year-old who lives in Ankeny, and I am in 2nd grade. I really like my school and teachers. I love playing with Legos and singing in my church choir and playing at Ninja U. Something special about me is I am transgender. And no, my parents did not make me this way. This is who I am. Underscored. I even chose my own name. Ever since I can remember, I knew deep inside that I was a girl. When I started telling my parents, it was brand new to them, but they made sure to tell me how much they love me no matter what. I have lots of friends at school and play with them. I haven't hurt anybody by being who I truly am, which was since kindergarten. I don't understand why leaders who are supposed to protect kids would make a law that hurts us. Transgender is not a bad word. I am not a bad person. If kids at school would start bullying me because of who I am and I needed help, how could my teachers help me if it's illegal to talk about it? And if they did, people could sue them. And that would make me feel sad and terrible inside. I thought that people who make bills are supposed to solve problems. But this bill is solving no problem. I am not a problem. Please keep innocent kids like me safe and accepted in our schools. I beg you to vote no. Thank you. Lily is 9 years old. I met her down in the cafeteria the other day. She's still showing up here with her mom, sticking up for her rights and other people, other transgender people like her. She's in 4th grade now. She's a couple inches taller. She's every bit as articulate and animated, every bit as wonderful as she was 2 years ago. I think she has great potential for leadership in this state, providing that we allow her to stay. But this bill allows her and her family to be discriminated against. The bill would allow Lily or her family to be denied an apartment. So when Lily gets old enough to go off to school, and if she happens to stay in this state, a landlord, under this bill, a landlord could deny her renting an apartment simply because she's transgender and not for any other reason. A bank could deny her family a home mortgage just because they have a transgender child. A fast food restaurant manager could deny Lily her first job, even though she's a real hard-working kid. She could be denied her first job because she's transgender. Under this bill, the credit union could deny her a loan for her first car. A diner could deny her a seat at a lunch counter because she's transgender, and for that reason alone. So this bill has real consequences for real people. It is a shadow over the future of my friend Lily and her family and every other transgender child and youth and adult in this state. Senator Schultz has repeatedly pointed to the fact that there are 28 other states that don't have transgender protection in their code. Shame on them. Thank you to Senator Schultz for making my point. I have been arguing all week that Iowa has been and is a leader for civil rights and human rights. Yeah, we're ahead of 28 other states, unless or until we pass this bill, in which case we begin marching in reverse. Iowa has been a leader. You heard me talk about this on Monday. Our Supreme Court, even before we were a state, our territorial Supreme Court freed a slave named Ralph. He made it to free soil in Iowa, and he could not be dragged back into slavery. Our Supreme Court ended segregated schools in 1868, 86 years before the U.S. Supreme Court got around to it in Brown versus Board. And our Supreme Court at that time rejected the separate but equal language that ominously is creeping back into the current bill. Public accommodations, we denied race or ethnicity discrimination in 1884, 80 years before the Great Civil Rights Act at the federal level. So yeah, there are 28 other states that haven't got our proud record of leading on human rights. You know, I grew up in a Republican family back when the Republican Party was still known as the Party of Lincoln. And I remember specifically how Lincoln closed his second inaugural address: with malice toward none, with charity for all. Republicans here in Iowa are today betraying the heritage of their party. If it hasn't happened before, it will surely happen should this bill pass. Republicans will be guided not by the thoughts of Lincoln. Their motto will be with malice toward some and charity for none. Our state motto: our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain. Please do not now betray our motto. Maintain our rights. Vote no.
Chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, history is not a collection of past events. It is a warning, a roadmap of mistakes we must never repeat. Today I stand before you to speak about a pattern that we have seen before, one that began with words, escalated into policies, and ended in unimaginable loss. As most of you know, I am an educator, so I'm going to talk some history. In 1933, they first went after the trade unionists. Then they went after the people with disabilities. Then Jehovah's Witnesses. Then the homosexuals. And then the gypsies. Then the Jews. In Nazi Germany, the persecution of Jewish people did not start with the concentration camps. It started with rhetoric. It started with the workers, the disabled, the specific religious groups, and those who are gay. And again, then the Jews. It started with leaders and media figures blaming these people for societal's problems, painting them as dangerous, different, and corrupting. It started with laws that stripped away their rights, banning them from schools, workplaces, public life. It started with neighbors turning a blind eye, thinking, this isn't my problem. Step by step, each of their rights were taken, their dignity eroded, their existence demonized. And when the world finally saw the gas chambers, the mass graves, we vowed never again. But never again is not a promise that keeps itself. Today we are hearing familiar rhetoric, this time directed at trans people. We hear politicians and pundits claiming that trans people are a threat to children, to women, to society itself. We see laws barring them from bathrooms, sports teams, and medical care. We see attempts to erase them from the public life, to make it impossible for them to exist openly and safely. This is why we cannot take away their rights that they have, because this body gave them those protected classes, those protected class rights in the Iowa Constitution to make sure that they could not be discriminated against for things like housing, jobs, and credit. The tactics today are disturbingly familiar. First, spread fear. We did that with the bathrooms. We did that with sports. Make the public believe that this is a minority group is dangerous and deceptive. Then use that fear to justify taking away their rights. First in small ways, then in ways that make life unbearable. And when people speak, when they speak out about them, they're dismissed. They call them radicals, say they're overreacting or dramatic. But history shows us where this road leads. It shows us that injustice against one group threatens all. When we normalize the idea that some people do not deserve protections, the idea that some people do not deserve protections for the same rights and the same dignity and the same safety as the rest, we set the stage for greater oppression. And those protected rights were given because they were not getting equal treatment under the federal law. Furthermore, targeting transgender people specifically denies them the ability to live freely as their authentic selves, and it's just plain wrong. A society is one where rights are upheld for all, regardless of gender identity, race, or any other characteristics. This bill undermines personal freedoms, creates legal inequalities, fosters discrimination and violence. Historically, denying rights to one group has often led to broader injustices against others, hence the protected class in the Iowa Constitution. We must not let history repeat itself. We must recognize these warning signs and speak out before it's too late. Because every person, transgender or otherwise, deserves to live without fear, without shame, and without being told that their existence is a problem to be solved, or in this case, trying to erase them from society. One of the first moves as a body we should do is to stop discriminatory bills that keep rolling through here against the trans and LGBTQ people. We heard from Representative Holt that that's part of the reason why this bill came to us, because they can't get legislation passed or past the courts. But we also know that's untrue. The ones that spurred this bill to land on our plates first, because the governor supposedly lost lawsuits, but she hasn't. We know that this is untrue, based on civil liberties in the Constitution. Maybe this body should stop discriminating against marginalized people so that we don't need to have a lawsuit or special class protections. But because those bills do exist, these special class protections are necessary. This bill and all the bills previously put forth to remove rights and dismiss marginalized groups show us exactly why we need to continue to have these special classes for the transgender community in the Iowa Constitution. The past is watching us. Let us prove today that we have learned from it and vote no on this bill so that our transgender students, neighbors, friends, and coworkers and family members can continue to live their authentic selves just as the rest of us get to enjoy without fear of discrimination or even worse. I ask this body to please vote no on this bill today. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator Stade.
Thank you, Mr. President. Why do you all hate them so? I want to share with you an example of an Iowan, my constituent, who will be further harmed by this legislation. Here are their words addressed in an email to me this week. You came to my door last summer. I have a dog that barked at you, and you were very brave to trust me when I asked if he could sniff your hand. I was happy that I was right, and he calmed down shortly after. Your wife complimented the pale green Victorian-style couch that we have on our front porch, and I invite both of you back at any time to share a drink or a conversation about what it is like to be a transgender Iowan. I voted for you in 2024. Please vote for me today. Please oppose Senate File 418. My job, my house, and possibly my life depend on the bill being stopped. For me, if this bill is passed, it'll be the first time in the nation's history that a state has repealed or removed any section of its state's civil rights codes. This would make it perfectly legal to discriminate, to deny housing to, deny a loan to, deny a rental application, deny a scholarship, deny entry to your business, anyone who is transgender or who may be perceived to be transgender. This bill will define gender as sex assigned at birth and removes any ability for a natural-born Iowan to legally change their gender. This bill would prevent people born in the state of Iowa from updating their vital records, such as a birth certificate, to reflect their gender, regardless if they have had gender-affirming surgeries up to and including what has been known historically as a sex change. The first step to obtaining the correct gender marker on a driver's license, passport, Social Security card, or any government-issued document is to first and foremost obtain an updated copy of your birth certificate, displaying your gender. This is not a quick, easy, nor free process. This bill would not only affect Iowans today, but would also affect the thousands of transgender Americans who have fled this state already for safer, more trans-inclusive states and countries, those who are no longer Iowa citizens. This bill would prevent transgender born in the state of Iowa from ever accessing updated driver's licenses in their new home state, because Iowa would never issue an updated copy of the birth certificate, and they would have no recourse. When your driver's license does not detail your correct gender, you are outing yourself as a trans person and as someone who can legally be discriminated against. So anyone who is able to access your driver's license, this would include grocery store clerks, pharmacies, as an ID is needed to purchase cold and flu medications, and upon discovering your transgender status, you can be removed from the premises with no recourse. This includes rental applications, apartments, who upon learning your transgender status can deny your rental application with no recourse. The same goes for car loans, mortgages, child care facilities, bars, restaurants, and more. This includes police officers who ask for ID at regular traffic stops, who upon learning of your transgender status have been known to become more aggressive against transgender individuals. In the Senate Judiciary Committee meeting Wednesday, Senator Jason Schultz of District 6 accused fellow senators who were in opposition to the bill of gross inflammation of theoretical events. He stated truthfully that there are states that do not have gender identity listed in their state constitution's civil rights codes. And he stated wrongfully that you cannot find a bus full of transgender people who have faced discrimination in Austin, Texas. To that I say, you can find a bus full of transgender people in the city of Des Moines that have faced discrimination. And in any town in this state, you can fill that bus with transgender people who have faced discrimination already because of their transgender status. This discrimination takes place today, now, and it will continue to take place, and all that we can do is pursue recourse through the Civil Rights Code. When I began my social, medical, and legal transformation in 2014, 7 years after gender identity was added to our Civil Rights Code in Iowa, my employer told me that if I were to continue with my hormone replacement therapy, and if I were to change my pronouns at work, that I'd be asked to leave my position. I was fired for being transgender in the state of Iowa. This happened to me with civil rights protections. Removing gender identity from the Iowa Civil Rights Code will cause these events to happen more frequently, and those impacted Most would have no legal recourse. I am begging you for your help and for your voice. Please vote no. If you come to my door again, give me just a little heads up and I'll have a drink ready. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Clinton, Senator Zimmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Each morning, this body begins with a prayer that often incorporates some sentiment that the decisions we will make will be for the well-being and benefit of Iowans. When I hear these prayers and I reflect on their meaning, I'm repeatedly drawn to Matthew chapter 22, verse 35. A lawyer asked Jesus a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. This is the greatest and first. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. What does that mean to love your neighbor? Does it mean to only love your neighbor that looks like me? In May of 2024, Governor Kim Reynolds signed House File 2545 into law, upon whose tenets state Iowa Public Schools will teach the history of Iowa and the United States, including the founding of Iowa and famous Iowans. The bill specifies that our children learned Iowa's history, not Alabama, not Oklahoma, not Mississippi, but Iowa. Iowa's history provides a roadmap of how to love thy neighbor in ways that other states have not. In 1838, Iowa, while still a territory, allowed unmarried women to own property. At that time, women did not have rights, and in most of the U.S., maybe some of the 28 that don't have this, that they were considered property themselves. In 1839, the Supreme Court of Iowa Territory, in its first ruling that we've heard before in Ralph, ruled that a slave from a slave state could not be forced to return to the slave state after reaching Iowa soil. In 1846, founded on the idea of fairness, the Iowa State Constitution prohibited slavery even before the nation as a whole adopted the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1846, Iowa demonstrated its acceptance of religious minorities by allowing safe passage of the Mormons through western Iowa who were fleeing religious persecution in Illinois. In 1851, Iowa became the second state to legalize interracial marriage, a century before the rest of America. In 1867, African American men were granted the right to vote. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which did the same thing nationally, wasn't ratified until 3 years later. In 1868, Iowa became the second state to outlaw segregated schools, 90 years before the rest of America. The Iowa State Supreme Court ruled in the case brought before us by Alexander Clark of Muscatine that all children in Iowa must attend the same schools. In 1869, Iowa became one of the first states to grant women the right to vote in school board elections. This was a bold and groundbreaking step, laying the groundwork for a national suffrage movement that would culminate in the 19th Amendment in 1920. In 1873, the Iowa State Supreme Court ruled that African Americans are entitled to equal treatment in public accommodations. There's kind of a theme going here. In 1885, Iowa once again demonstrated its acceptance of religious minorities as Iowa's first Muslim immigrants settled in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In 1919, Iowa became the 10th state to ratify the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which granted women the right to vote. Although Iowa was 10th, it was only short 3 weeks between the first state ratifying the amendment and Iowa doing the same thing. Illinois was the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment on June 10, 1919, and Iowa ratified it on July 2nd of 1919. By the way, the final state to ratify the 19th Amendment was Mississippi in 1984. 1934, the first mosque built in the United States was built in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It is now known as the Mother Mosque of America in Cedar Rapids. The only exclusively Muslim cemetery is in the United States is in the Muslim National Cemetery in Cedar Rapids. In 1953, Iowan Abdallah Ingram, a World War II veteran from Cedar Rapids, convinced President Eisenhower that Islam should be recognized by the U.S. military along with Christianity and Judaism. Additionally, he was successful urging President Eisenhower to have the symbol I for Islamic stamped on the dog tags of American Muslim soldiers. In 1970, the University of Iowa became one of the first universities in the U.S. to allow a student LGBTQ group. It is also one of the first universities in the U.S. to add sexual orientation to its non-discrimination policy. In 1990, Iowa Senator Tom Harkin became one of the authors of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, of which, by the way, we are one of the states now filing suit against that. In 2007, Iowa became the second state to allow full marriage equality for same-sex couples. In 2007, Iowa became the seventh state to ban discrimination due to sexual orientation and added gender identity, thus making sexual orientation and gender identity protected class in Iowa. In 2007, Iowa became the fifth state to protect children from bullying due to sexual orientation and gender identity. Kind of goes in the face of what this opening statement about this bill is all about. And in 2009, on April 3rd, the Iowa State Supreme Court handed down a unanimous decision in Varnum versus Bryan in favor of full marriage equality for same-sex couples, a decision reaffirming Iowa's commitment to equality and justice for all of its citizens. I would like to conclude where I began by asking, who is the neighbor we should love? Where will this legislative body stand in Iowa history? On the shoulders of those that came before us? Or are we going in a totally different direction? With the lawmakers who recognize the dignity of those who did not look, speak, live, or worship like them, or with those who no longer identify with those values? I yield.
The chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Walls.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm hoping that Senator Schultz might be willing to yield just a few more questions.
Senator Schultz, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Walls, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Schultz, we're obviously on the amendment now. You all voted down the amendments that had been brought forward by Senator Blake. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around understanding this piece on employment in particular. I'm looking at your bill here on page 4 that specifically is striking out gender identity from employment protections. And I guess, can you try, again, and I want you to do it in your words, I don't want to put words in your mouth. How is this specific change going to help protect Iowa women and girls?
I have made the decision that we are going to do a 100% bill to provide clarity and predictability going forward. If we have different policies going different directions, there is a chance that it could be questioned as to the true intent of the legislature.
And so the intent here is to make sure that employers are allowed to discriminate against transgender Iowans on the basis of gender identity. That's the goal here. Is that right?
You're doing it again.
Well, I'm trying to understand, Senator. Genuinely. That's the intent. No, it's not.
No.
So it's not the intent.
No.
Okay. Well,
that's nonsense.
Okay.
Absolute nonsense. I've been kind of getting ready because I could see you getting excited over there before on the previous speaker. No, the intent is that we have a clear policy that protects women and children, that keeps our bathroom and sports bills, women's sports bills, in code, and that protects taxpayers, because all of this has already happened. It's a reality, and this is the legal remedy. We had to pick one side or the other and not go halfway.
So, do you think that there are people in Iowa who are not facing discrimination in employment on the basis of their gender identity? So that's why there's no change that will happen here?
You're not going to like the answer. Because I've said it 100 times. There's 28 states that don't have this in code. We can see the result of not having it in code. There's not a problem nationwide.
You think that transgender people in these other states don't face discrimination on
I think
in employment?
people, including the folks in the demographics here, run into difficult times in their lives and are picked on for reasons that they shouldn't be. But I do not believe that the policy that we have now properly protects women and children or protects taxpayers, which we've been trying to do, and that is why. No matter how many times you try to put it in my mouth, try to twist it, try to move it to a different topic, that's the simple, short answer.
Senator, would it describe you to learn that like most transgender people across the country have experienced harassment or discrimination in their workplace?
That one I actually missed. I didn't understand the question. Could you say that again?
Would it surprise you to learn that the vast majority of transgender Americans across our country report experiencing harassment or discrimination in the workplace?
I don't know. I've never thought about it before.
You haven't thought about the fact that transgender Iowans or Americans generally
everybody has something wrong has something happen to them. Did you know that right now the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, has a white heterosexual woman in a case in front of her because she has been discriminated against under one of the states, under Ohio's. I believe a lesbian was hired ahead of her, and then I believe a transgender was when on documented resumes, she was more qualified. Everybody runs into this, and they have the opportunity to file suit.
Correct, because you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex. That's in Iowa Civil Rights Code.
Yes, biological sex.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I am aware of that lawsuit. But I guess I'm surprised to hear that you haven't thought about the harassment.
No, I didn't say that. You're putting words in my mouth.
Okay. Can you say it again? That I didn't get it.
I hadn't thought about the perspective of people across the country believing that they've been discriminated against.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
we can talk about it now.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about it.
I mean, Senator, it's like 82% of transgender Americans say that they face discrimination or harassment in the workplace. I mean, that's like a lot.
They're not adjudicated. They haven't proven their case, and everybody feels that they are a victim. I've had bad days where I'm like, the world is out to get me. That's my point, is that we all operate under the same set of laws. We have the same issues in our day.
Well, but Senator, that's not the case. I mean, when you look at Iowa civil rights law as it currently exists, it specifically says a person to refuse to hire, accept, register, classify, or refer for employment, to discharge any employee, or to otherwise discriminate in employment against any applicant for employment or any employee because of the age, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity is then struck through in this bill, national origin, religion, or disability of such applicant or employee, unless based upon the nature of the occupation. So again, 82% of Americans who are transgender have faced discrimination in the workplace. An enormous number of Americans have specific protections carved out in employment law to give them additional protection because of the persecution or the harassment that they face in the workplace. And this bill specifically removes it for gender identity. That's what the bill does.
And it ensures the protection of women and children in bathrooms and in girls' sports. It protects taxpayers from paying for things they don't want to do. That's the point of the bill. We are here to ensure that a district court does not throw out previous legislation, as they've already in Good versus Iowa Department of Human Services. The court called it moot, but they were going to. They said we would, but it doesn't matter now. So this is already there. That's why we're here. Iowa is the only state that has this conflicting code between the two. I have asked the Senate, the House has the same bill. We have chosen that we would prefer between the two to provide a safe, predictable, stable structure for women and children, that we can control our own budget as representatives and senators of the people. That's what we're here for.
Can you just, for like one more time, help me understand how Iowa women and girls are going to benefit from employers being able to prevent a transgender Iowan from obtaining employment in the workplace? Like, what's the connection there?
You're twisting my words here. We are here for women and children. I mean, it is that simple. I'm not doing this just to make people roll their eyes. This is why we're here. We have a conflict in code. We're solving it.
What's the conflict with the employment section with what you're talking about?
With the words gender identity in Iowa code, our bills protecting the biologically proper use of bathrooms, changing areas, locker rooms, and the protections against boys declaring themselves girls and participating in sports will be thrown out. I've pointed it out. This already happened with taxpayer dollars. The case has already been filed for bathrooms. We're protecting them.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Mr. President, I'm struggling with this. You know, in 2007, the Iowa legislature adopted protections across a wide range of different areas that we already offer this protection to Iowans for a bunch of different classes. And I just read a long list of them when it comes to age, race, creed, color, sex. And then we added to that list sexual orientation and gender identity. And believe it or not, I mean, Mr. President, it was a bipartisan vote. I mean, Democrats and Republicans came together to say that in the state of Iowa, discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, when it specifically comes to employment, housing, public accommodation, education, and access to credit, is wrong. That discrimination is wrong. And the legislation that is in front of us today is not just an attempt to roll back the clock and to go back to 2006. It is specifically targeting a group of people who already face enormous amounts of discrimination, harassment in the workplace. I mean, Mr. President, 82% of transgender Americans report that they have faced discrimination or harassment in the workplace. You're not talking, it's not like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100 transgender people are experiencing discrimination. But almost all of them are facing discrimination or harassment in the workplace. Now, the good news is that a lot of people say that in the last several years, they haven't been fired or discriminated against when it comes to employment. But only half. Half of transgender Americans say that they have been fired. They have been overlooked for a promotion or otherwise discriminated against in the workplace because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The stated rationale by the senator from Crawford simply does not hold up. The reality is that we have an enormous number of Iowans who benefit from protection under Iowa civil rights law. And I think Senator Schultz would agree with that. When it comes to age, color, creed, familial status, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race, religion, protections against retaliation, sex, sexual orientation, we have specific protections in Iowa law because we know that discrimination on the basis of these characteristics happens. And what this bill does is it says specifically it is okay to discriminate in employment on the basis of gender identity. It is okay to discriminate in access to housing on the basis of gender identity. It is okay to discriminate in public accommodations on the basis of gender identity. It is okay to discriminate when it comes to access to credit on the basis of gender identity. Senator, I hear your frustration when you say that you feel like the protections, in your words, that were passed by this body about protecting a variety of things aren't being, you can't actually implement it because of this conflicting code here in the Iowa Civil Rights Act. But what I don't understand is going so much further than that. Going after people's ability to access housing, people's ability to access employment, people's ability to access credit. I mean, Mr. President, that's what this bill does. That was what the amendments offered by the Senator Blake addressed. And they were voted down on a party line vote. We gave you the opportunity to take these concerns seriously, and obviously there was a decision not to do that. And then when asked to provide additional information about why or how removal of these protections would benefit Iowa women or girls, we got the same talking point that's been on repeat all week. And so, Mr. President, I have to say, it was shocking to hear that the senator from Crawford had not thought about employment discrimination against transgender people. Because that is an enormous part of what we're talking about here. If this bill becomes law, it will say to employers, you have a green light to discriminate. You have a green light to fire somebody because you don't like the fact that they're transgender. You have a green light to pass over somebody who's earned a promotion because of hard work, because of who they are. And that's wrong, Mr. President. That's wrong. And so I hope that before we cast our votes on Senate File 418, every single person in this chamber is thinking through very clearly about who's going to be helped by this law and who's going to be hurt by this law. Because Iowans are going to lose their jobs. They're going to be fired. And Senator Schultz is shaking his head. But, Senator, gender identity is literally struck through in this bill when it comes to protections for employment. It's in black and white. And if it is not your intent, if it is not Senator Schultz's intent to facilitate discrimination in the workplace on the basis of gender identity, we should lift the time certain and go back to the drawing board. Because, Mr. President, you can take this to the bank. Iowans are going to lose their jobs. They're going to be fired. They're going to be passed over promotions. They're going to be terminated unfairly if this becomes law. That's why these protections are there. They're there because 82% of transgender Americans do face that harassment and discrimination in the workplace. This is a sad day for Iowa. It's a sad day for transgender Iowans who work here, who have their roots here, who call this state home, who maybe moved here because Iowa was a leader in protecting against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. It's a sad day for everyone who calls this state home.
The chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Weiner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues who've already spoken. We've already heard that this is a common sense bill, needed for consistency, supposed to help women, supposed to help girls. All false. The Iowa Civil Rights Code isn't broken. It's just keeping otherwise qualified people from being discriminated against. That's it. There's nothing to fix. And there's nothing at risk now except people's lives. To be honest, I'm curious why, when Iowans have asked us to help them in so many other ways, to lower costs, help them earn a fair wage, increase the supply of affordable housing, fix our child care problem, make health care affordable, work on our cancer plague, you've chosen to push this. Instead of leaving well enough alone, this bill is an effort to erase a tiny group of Iowans, because that's what it does. We've seen this before. We know the blueprint. We are students of history. We Jews are history's inconvenient truth tellers. We know how it starts, and we know how it ends. It starts with vilifying and scapegoating and hating on one group in the name of protecting others. It starts with sending a message that someone is scary or a danger, and it ends badly. We know what it's like to be erased. I don't know if you did, but I learned about the Inquisition in Spain. We had to convert or die. The Crusades, they targeted Jewish communities, massacred, and expelled us. The holiday of Purim, just around the corner. It celebrates the deliverance of the Jews of Persia from a royal decree of death in the 5th century BCE. This has been going on for a while, and it's usually been couched in religion. And, of course, then there was World War II. A lot of my family doesn't exist because of the Holocaust. But as Senator Donahue said, we weren't first. First, it was the LGBT community and trans people who were sent to labor in concentration camps. As Illinois Governor Pritzker said in his State of the State speech recently, it started with people unhappy because of inflation and turned quickly to scapegoating groups. The root that tears apart your house's foundation began as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. Back to the bill. You've heard multiple times that it's just about bathrooms and sports, that it's needed to protect women and girls. No, it's not. As Senator Blake said, you have already disposed of those issues in previous sessions. You've heard that we have to deal with those issues again and take gender out of the Iowa Civil Rights Code because we're the only state with these conflicting laws. With all due respect, and as Senator Blake said, no, you don't. You don't. Attorneys in your caucus can confirm to you that when laws are in conflict, the most recently passed laws control. So what you're trying to do with these issues in this bill is duplicative. It is duplicative because they're already controlling law. You have already amended the Iowa Civil Rights Code. It's done and dusted, no conflict. But we've also heard that supposedly this will take the lawsuits away. It won't. You've heard a couple of times there are 28 states that don't have this in their civil rights code. Well, you know what? I wasn't aware that we were elected to the legislatures of those states. We are elected to the legislature of the state of Iowa, which has different laws and a very different approach. Our law happens to be very particular. The Iowa Supreme Court Summer case held that unless something is explicitly included in the Iowa Civil Rights Act, it's not covered. It's one of the reasons that gender was introduced and passed in 2007. You've heard that you have to pass this to stop the lawsuits against other laws you've passed, to stop the state from having to spend money. There's actually one super easy way to do that. Stop voting for unconstitutional laws. You have already passed the bills to do what you want, but this won't stop the lawsuits. It will, in fact, create more causes of action. You'll hear that there's no slippery slope, that it's a figment of our imagination. You may think that I have a wild imagination, Mr. President, but what I actually have is a logical, legally trained mind. But you're right on one count. There will be no slippery slope because we'll already be there right at the bottom of the slope. Because including gender in the Civil Rights Code as a right freely given in 2007 and removing it now are two very different votes. A yes vote today will create equal protection claims. Because if you vote later to remove all genders and gender identities, as has been said, anyone can refuse to hire any gender. Maybe you only want white men or women. You can then make that decision on any potential employee regardless of merit, which puts that slippery slope in the rearview mirror. Some other states have sex or sexual identity in their code that can encompass a lot of things. Not Iowa, not according to our case law and our history. Because the Iowa Supreme Court in summer flat out said that if you want to include a special class, you have to lay it out specifically. This bill, as multiple senators have said, would undermine protections for far more Iowans than you might think. The bottom line is, when a right such as this was freely granted under Romer v. Evans, if you were under no obligation to take it away, and you did take it away, you don't have to say anymore that you're targeting people because you just did. It's considered prima facie malice, targeting a specific and identifiable group for removal of rights that others have. So I have a brief story for you from a constituent whom I know quite well. He says, and these are in his words, I grew up in a dairy farm in rural Jasper County. I have degrees from Iowa State and the University of Iowa. I love Iowa and was happy to grow up with Iowa values. I was always proud of our motto, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. That's not what might happen. Here's a picture of my 14-year-old grandson. Got no picture. I carry it with me. He is trans. That's not something I think about, not until I hear that my grandson's rights and the rights of other kids and the entire trans community are having their rights, the rights we all have as Iowans, taken away. This is my grandson. He's bright, a straight-A student. He has a powerful singing voice. When he has sung the national anthem at large events, he's brought the audience to sustained applause. At school, he has won many awards for character and integrity. He plays in the honor band. I can't for the life of me understand how I will explain his rights as an Iowan, the rights we all enjoy, are being taken away by your actions. This is my grandson. Think about your children. Think of your grandchildren. What decision would you make if the rights of your grandchild were being ripped away? I bet you too would take a stand. You can do this today for my grandson, for other Iowa kids just like him, for a whole community. This is not a bill that Iowans are asking for. It's a cruel bill. It's just plain wrong. And I'm amazed by all this talk of fear and danger. Look at this 14-year-old boy. Do you fear him? I don't think so. What you are doing is going to hurt. And that's not what you're here for. Fix the bridges, clean the water, help with the housing shortage. There are Iowan problems that need to be addressed that would help Iowans. When it's time to vote, think of this guy. There's no reason to hurt him. But you will by passing this bill. Please reconsider. Vote against this bill and give all trans citizens of Iowa a chance to thrive. Thank you. So you'll also hear, or you've already heard, that this bill gives certain people extra rights, a leg up. No, it does not. I mean, the Civil Rights Code, it doesn't. That's a misunderstanding of what the Iowa Civil Rights Act does. It simply prevents discrimination against people who are otherwise at least equally well qualified. Protected classes would not exist if there had not been a need. Housing discrimination, employment discrimination, credit discrimination for otherwise equally qualified people. Do you know how to prevent that and how best to illustrate that? Orchestras used to be basically all white and all male. Then they changed how people audition to get the best musicians, not the ones who look like them, but the best musicians. They had people audition behind a curtain. Then they got the best cellists, the best violinists. Everyone got an equal shot, a fair shot. And surprise, they got a more diverse-looking orchestra, too. The Civil Rights Code is that audition curtain for protected classes, including gender. So I'm going to close in a way you might not expect. Remember that film, Monsters, Inc.? Did you watch it with your kids or grandkids? It tells a story of a basic common sense truth. For most of the movie, they produce and amass power by scaring and traumatizing kids. When that's not enough, they try to come up with a way to steal all the screams. They're also irrationally scared of the kids. But it turns out kids weren't dangerous at all, and that screams and fear were much less powerful than happiness and laughter. And that's just common sense. So is our state's motto, which reflects the long and proud civil rights history of which you've heard, and which we proudly fly on our flag. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. If you vote for this bill, we're about to be the first state to strip rights from Iowans. Who's next?
The chair recognizes the senator from Dallas, Senator Trone Garriott.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a Christian, I am praying for anyone who looks at any vulnerable class and sees an opportunity to exploit, to use for political gain. Because I see people. I see the specific families in my district worried about their children. I see the actual individuals who just want to be themselves and live their lives. I see my neighbors. I see friends. I see Iowans who deserve to have their state government stand up for their civil rights. As a person of faith, when I see vulnerable people, I want to understand. I want to respect. I want to protect. Those are my deeply held religious values. I just want to be honest about where I'm coming from. I'm telling you outright my motives. Because while it's not allowed in here, over the past few years, millions of dollars have been spent out there to impugn my character and my motives on this very issue. As an elected leader, I believe it is my job to stand up for the vulnerable and to stand up against discrimination. As a lawmaker, I know that taking away civil rights from anyone is a threat to everyone. Because the matter before us doesn't impact just one group of people as much as some might say it will, only anyone who is considered too feminine or not feminine enough, too masculine or not masculine enough. If someone decides you don't fit what they think you should be, they can discriminate against you in the workplace, in finances, in housing, and more. And passing this bill is saying that the state of Iowa is just fine with that. That doesn't protect me as a woman. That just makes me vulnerable. And it leaves me with one less route for recourse if I experience discrimination on this basis. This legislation doesn't protect me as a taxpayer, and yes, women are also taxpayers. And policies like this hurt our economy and our state revenues as more and more see Iowa as a place they don't want to call home. This legislation does not protect my kids or other people's children who are now more vulnerable to discrimination on this basis and who are deciding in larger and larger numbers that their future is not here in Iowa because of legislation like this. Instead, this is a win for bullies and the bigots and the abusers. And it's just the beginning. A testing of the waters. Iowans, your rights are next. It's not just speculation. The authors of this bill have publicly stated that they do not believe there should be any protected classes. They are going to be working their way down that list. Who's next? Who is next? My religious beliefs are important to me. Maintaining civil rights protection for religion is not just important to me, but it's important to a lot of Iowans. Religious belief, like gender identity, is not immutable. It can change. Since that was a reason given for overturning this protection, I guess now we should consider civil rights protections for religious identity to also be at risk. Another not immutable trait, disability. Right now, our Attorney General is suing to end federal protections for people with disabilities in housing, employment, transportation, education, and more. We should not believe for 1 second that state protections for disability are safe. There is nothing to say in defense of this, nothing that can be said to defend this, taking away the protection of law, opening wide the doors for discrimination. Silence is a statement, loud and clear. We aren't allowed to speculate about the motives of others, so let me make my motives crystal clear. I believe in an Iowa where we stand up for each other. No matter what, I will keep fighting for that Iowa, and I'm so grateful to know I am not the only one. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Scott, Senator Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. President. There were 329 pages of comments on this bill, in addition to all of the testimony that individuals provided during subcommittees on both sides of the chamber, and then the the hearing this morning. So I have a few that I want to read to you only because these are the voices of Iowans. I am a parent of a transgender adult, now 25 years old. My child, who grew up attending K-12 classes in the Winterset Community School District, struggled terribly during adolescence, yet came through it using therapy and the embrace of a wildly supportive family and circle of friends. He is now a college graduate, an accountant in the Des Moines area, self-sufficient, and a first-class human. The transgender population is a very tiny percentage of Iowans, yet each year, bills such as Senate File 418 are proposed, which seeks to diminish the humanity of the Iowans and make life even more difficult. Singling out this minority group for potential discrimination, mistreatment, persecution, and harassment is unacceptable, wrong, and dangerous ideology. This proposed legislation solves no problems, and it's a disgrace that we must continue to fight for the dignity of this small subset of Iowans who just want to be left alone, free from government interference in their lives. please do not support this bill and focus instead on issues that advance the lives and livelihood of Iowans, all Iowans. And another comment, I have a non-binary sibling in school. Already they have attempted suicide 3 times, and kids are bullying them because of it. This bill is going to make it okay for kids to continue to bully, not only them, but any transgender child. My wife is transgender, and she has never been happier. She is trying to do everything she can to make our relationship work and being able to get herself help. And she deserves to have those rights protected. These 2, among many others, are Iowans. One is too young to have to deal with this. This bill will make everything harder on most Iowans mentally, emotionally, and financially. This bill is going to cause a lot of bloodshed, but you have the power to stop it. Please protect them and give them the right to exist as any other Iowan. Then I want to read a testimony given by Elizabeth Klaus. She says that she's a 3rd-generation Iowan and goes on to say, I quote, "Let me tell you, I do not want to be here today doing this. I am here today as a parent of a trans child. I'm personally heartbroken by the direction our state is going, and I will tell you, I feel so powerless to stop it. My family, friends, and community, regardless of their political affiliation, are doing all they can to support my family, and we are using their voices to oppose this legislation. But I fear that our pleas are falling on deaf ears, and that the people in this room, again, this was her testimony, who have so much power over my life and my child's future's potential, have hardened their hearts to families like me. As a parent and an aunt, the greatest joy of my life has been watching children in my life grow and become who they are. I did not become a parent anticipating that the person my child would become would be in opposition to his sex assigned at birth. But none of us can choose the child we are given to raise. This is in the hands of our Creator, who made my child just as he made yours. As a parent, it's hard to look at my child and to find any fault with him or who he is, and it is pure hubris to think that I could change the way he sees himself in this world, when by accepting the truth of who he is has helped my child thrive in all ways. If you could only meet my son, you would see that he is smart, funny, and kind, that he brings so much to any community he is part of, that he is loved and supported and perfect exactly the way he is. He deserves the best possible future in the home he loves, as do all Iowans. He is not any different or less deserving of access to equal protection under the state law than anyone else's child just because of the way he is. I ask all of you here today if you would accept this for your children in your lives, because I simply cannot accept it for mine. I want to remind you that you do not have to do this. You don't have to do any of this. And she was there today as an Iowan, a mother, to beg for mercy for her child and for every trans child in our state, just as any loving mother would. I have a few more to read, but I want to share one of the things that is asked of me when I go to the classrooms and talk to students in schools. As a classroom teacher, a former classroom teacher, that really is something I love to do. And a question that they ask me is, can you name something that you did that you are so very proud of? And I talk about my vote in 2007. I talk about my vote in 2007 that added sexual orientation and gender identity to the Constitution, to civil rights protection. But I have to tell you, the one thing that I am so ashamed of today is this bill in front of us. Vote no.
The chair recognizes Senator from Lynn, Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, Iowa Republicans will make Iowa the first state ever to strip its citizens of civil rights. Not only are you destroying our history of civil rights advances, which were very well detailed by Senator Zimmer, you won't even allow the proper amount of time needed to consider something of this magnitude by limiting debate to 3:30 p.m. today. Thousands of people have come to the Capitol this week to urge you to stop this. There was a line around the Capitol this morning of Iowans waiting to get in here, to speak with you, to have their voices heard. Did you hear them? Do you hear the people sing? This bill is part of a national agenda rolling back rights for the LGBT community. Trans folks are the canaries in the coal mine. Right here in Iowa, we've had bills filed to roll back equal protection for marriage equality, and this week, a representative in Michigan filed a resolution asking the Supreme Court to strip same-sex Americans of the right to marry. We've heard the majority restate national talking points designed to inspire fear and animus towards a small minority of Iowans, transgender and non-binary people. It is shameful, shameful. And a group of your Republican colleagues in the House filed an amendment to this bill because even they saw that this goes too far. Democrats gave you 3 separate opportunities today to specify that trans folks can't be discriminated against in housing, employment, and credit. You rejected all 3, and that's the tell. You've articulated a few areas that you seek to address with this bill. However, the fact that this bill is so expansive to remove an entire group of people from civil rights protections speaks to the real agenda, which is policing gender expression and creating a world so hostile to those who don't fit your mold that trans or non-gender conforming people can't exist. Not one time in my life, or the life of anybody I know, and I know a lot of people, not one time has a man masqueraded as a woman to threaten women in the restroom. But do you know who does threaten women around restrooms? Men who threaten women they don't think fit the feminine mold. The restroom has long been a dangerous place for women assigned female at birth who don't fit what dominant culture considers to be that feminine mold. And policing gender in this country isn't new. All the way back to the 1960s, both men and women could be stopped and forced to show 3 articles of clothing fitting society's idea of what a man or woman can wear. And maybe that's what some of you mean by making America great again. Senator Schultz talked about women and children. So let's talk about women and children, because there are people in this room who think a 12-year-old should be forced to carry her rapist's baby. Give me a break. And I know that trans men shared their stories in the subcommittee and public hearing for the bill. Senator McClintock, one of your constituents came and really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you. And I think we all acknowledge that many women would certainly feel odd about a person presenting as a man with a beard walking into their restroom. And that's the thing here, is that some might think that supporters of this bill haven't considered that, but I assert that they have. They know the confusion, strife, and danger this will cause for trans people, but that's the point. Creating a world so dangerous that trans people are erased one way or the other by fear, self-harm, or violence by others. Every LGBTQ person of my generation remembers Brandon Tina, a young trans man who was raped and murdered for being trans. The agenda is to create a world where the walls close in until there is no room to exist. And this bill forces us to ask whose civil rights are on the chopping block next. You know why we name groups in civil rights code? Because we as a society see that despite our best efforts, certain groups of people are targeted and their opportunities are limited by prejudice and violence. Would Senator Schultz yield?
Senator Schultz, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Earlier, you mentioned in regards to the nature of discrimination, I think you mentioned we all have a bad day. You've had bad days, yes, right? Okay, thank you. I appreciate you answering that question. That was it. Thank you. Well, Senator Schultz, I wonder, have you ever had a day so bad where a group of men raped you, beat you, and murdered you because they did not like your gender expression? Obviously not, because you're still sitting here today. We have 2 members of the Iowa House and many others who have alluded that they don't think there should be any protected classes such as religion or disability. This will not stop here. And you know what else? You're breaking my heart today. Senator Winkler, thank you for your vote in 2007. 15 years ago, as a young college graduate, I made the choice to stay here in Iowa because I was proud of our civil rights history. People who looked ahead and back to our history of being a state that moves more and more towards including more people, built the world that many of us inhabit now, the world that allowed many of us to make Iowa our home. As a young queer person, I felt valued, and I saw that lawmakers understood the importance of including gender identity in civil rights code. I felt that I could build a life here and focus on my career because I wouldn't have to worry about whether my livelihood hinged upon whether an employer thought my gender was appropriate or whether I dressed in the style they decided someone assigned female at birth should dress. I've been proud of our state, and I've encouraged other tech workers to come here too, because I felt that they would be protected and they could build a career here too. You are destroying that with this bill. I've had constituents move away from Iowa to ensure their own safety or that of their children. That's wrong. Guess what, though? I'm not leaving. Over 500,000 Iowans voted against Governor Reynolds and this agenda, and I'm here for them. You can try to silence Iowans by limiting debate today, but we won't be quiet. Trans rights are human rights. We will continue to fight for the day when our state lives up to the motto of our flag. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain.
The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Beloved Iowans who are watching at home today and who have been at the State House all week, thank you for being here today. thank you for being here all week to stand up for the basic human rights of our fellow Iowans. Like Senator Winkler, one of my most memorable votes as a lawmaker happened nearly 18 years ago on April 25th, 2007. I was a member of the Iowa House of Representatives when both the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate cast bipartisan votes to prohibit discriminatory employment, public accommodation, housing, education, and credit practices based upon a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. I had just had my 4th child. While we wrapped up that session, I remember the day particularly because the Speaker of the Senate pulled me aside and said, "We are going to vote to expand rights of Iowans today, and I need you and your baby to be in the chamber. Make sure you have the diaper bag because we are going to lock the chamber doors with a call of the House. We will use the State Patrol if we have to make sure all of our affirmative votes are here so we can get this done for Iowans." On that day, both the House and the Senate passed this measure with bipartisan votes, and we celebrated a bipartisan victory that our governor signed into law. It was a joyful day in Iowa history. As a mom of 4 children, I have seen how liberating it is for them to grow up with their friends at church, their friends at school, with their teachers, with our pastors, with our neighbors, able to live as who they are. In 2007, when Democrats controlled the Iowa House, the Iowa Senate, and the governor's office, we were passing policies that helped Iowans, like raising the minimum wage, expanding health care and making it more affordable, bringing green energy to Iowa, creating great paying jobs, making our state a safer and happier place to live with fun cultural opportunities that would encourage young people and young families to want to live in our state. That's what Democrats believe we should still be doing today instead of bills like this that strip Iowans of their human and civil rights. Iowans shouldn't have to worry that every time the Republican-led State House comes back into session that their human and civil rights are on the line. But that is exactly what you have done with your bold agenda. What could we be doing instead? How about feeding Iowa's kids and making our schools #1 again? How about making life more affordable for Iowans with better housing opportunities instead of housing discrimination? We're the #2 cancer state in the country, the only state with a rising cancer rate. And you want to spend time working on stripping away people's human and civil rights. We could be cleaning our water. We could be protecting our land and soil. We could be protecting property rights for our farmers. I want to talk to our young Iowans who are listening today because I'm sure you're frustrated, you're angry, you're sad, you're scared, and you're tired of being gaslit by the people who are elected to serve you. You've seen Governor Reynolds turn away millions of dollars in food assistance for Iowa kids who live in your neighborhoods and go to school with you. You've seen Governor Reynolds sign an abortion ban bill that would force a 10-year-old to have a baby.
Point of order has been called. Senator Dawson, seek your
Again,
point.
Mr. President, Rule 9, the senator shall confine all remarks to the question under debate and shall avoid discussing personalities or improprieties or implication of improvement of motives.
Senator.
I'm not discussing a personality.
Senator,
I'm
please
actually
confine your
stating
remarks
facts.
to the bill.
Okay. Instead of standing up for your rights, you've seen Republican lawmakers and Governor Reynolds ban books in your school libraries. Instead of standing up for your human and basic civil rights, you've seen the governor and Republicans decimate our AEAs and go after kids with disabilities.
Senator Peterson, Senator Dawson, would you please come to the well? Just a reminder to the body to be careful to confine the remarks. I understand that can be a gray area, but let's do a good job of confining our remarks to the content of the bill. Senator Peterson, you're in order.
Thank you. I understand that it's uncomfortable when senators start connecting the dots for Iowans. I do want to read a letter that was sent to me this week from an Iowa mom. And I do believe a parent's love is one of the most beautiful, beautiful things that we should listen to and support. This letter begins, "Hello. I have started writing this statement hundreds of times in my head over the last few days at all hours of the day and night. And every time I get stuck, just because I'm at a complete loss. I have moved between feelings of anger, despair, devastation, disbelief, and such a deep feeling of sadness that I cannot describe. To know my child is to love my child. Oh, how I wish you knew my child, my non-binary child. I was born and raised in Iowa, a very different Iowa, in which I am living in now. After having graduated from college at the University of Northern Iowa, I lived in several other states before meeting my husband and returning to Iowa to be closer to family after our first child was born. I always took great pride in telling people from other states about Iowa and what a great place it is. Its history of being on the forefront of legal decisions regarding civil rights and marriage equality. Today, I'm left wondering how this has disappeared, and I am left feeling that it is actually many people's hopes. After all, many public comments have said as much, that families like mine leave Iowa, and yet to know my child is to love my child. LGBTQ plus people have existed since the world began, and today, more and more trans and non-binary people are living their lives openly. With these changes in society, people naturally have questions and issues that arise that many people may not have thought about before. I hear people saying they want their child to feel safe using the restroom or showering in spaces such as a gym or at a pool. I also want my child to be safe in those spaces. So I ask you, when have our elected leaders and community members had this discussion in a thoughtful, productive manner? I hear people saying they want their child to have a right to participate in sports and have a level playing field. I also want that. When have our elected leaders and community members had this discussion in a thoughtful and productive manner? You do not have to take rights away from one group of people in order for another to have those rights. Within my own extended family, we have had a wide range of political beliefs. In raising our children, we have always shared with them not only what we believe as a family and why, but that what other families may also believe and their why. I'm sure there are people on both sides of the aisle that may disagree with the approach, but that is what we have chosen. When one of my children told us they were non-binary, what worried me most was talking to family members with whom previous discussions indicated at best a lack of understanding and at worst a belief that non-binary people don't exist, that it's made up, and that we have indoctrinated our child into this viewpoint. We determined the best way to handle these varying views was to have a discussion among the adult family members. I communicated that it was non-negotiable, that my child's pronouns be accepted and that they be treated as they had always been. I acknowledge that people have different levels of understanding about the topic, and I encourage people to come to me with any questions they may have, that no answer would be judged if it came from a place of wanting to learn and grow. And believe me, a mom can tell. I come to all of you now in that same spirit, while also acknowledging the reality of today's political climate. I know there are those of you that will surely vote no on this bill, and to those of you, I express my thanks. You may suffer politically because of this, but you will be on the right side of history. I know there are those of you that will surely vote yes to this bill, and to you, I feel sad because you will never know the greatness that is my non-binary child or the greatness of all the other trans kids and adults that live here in Iowa. And to those of you who aren't quite sure, I speak directly to you. You are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and the reality is you may lose your seat for your vote on this bill. Ask yourself, is eliminating the civil rights protections for gender identity the right solution to people's concerns? Do not succumb to these divisive, flaming the fear tactics being used. If you don't really understand what trans means or wonder why pronouns are important or why it seems like more kids are coming out these days, let's have those conversations in a productive way. Vote no. The safety and well-being of all people is in your hands. And then, if you want to, reach out to me, ask questions, and talk to just a regular mom who thinks both of her kids are the best in the world. I want to thank the parent for that letter. I know that parent is in the balcony listening. I also received a letter that was from her non-binary child. Hello. I am a pretty normal kid. I go to school, play video games, have 2 pet cats, and really cool friends. I am also non-binary. Trans and non-binary people have existed since the beginning of time. LGBTQ plus people are coming out and embracing themselves as they really are, something that was downright unsafe for us until very recently. This bill would make our lives yet unsafe yet again. My safety is just important as another person's. It doesn't matter whether they are gay, straight, bi, or even straight. The letter goes on, but I'm just so honored to represent Iowans, salt of the earth people. I don't cry very often, but going down in the rotunda today to see all of the allies who came out in support of their fellow Iowans, knowing the damage of this bill and wanting to show their support, thank you, thank you, thank you. The fight is not over. We will continue. Iowa has been a place of love, a place of support for our friends and neighbors, and we will be there again. Maybe not today, but soon. And your voices in the rotunda showed we can turn this around. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Dallas, Senator Trone Garriott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think one of the most important roles we have as legislators is to listen to the people of Iowa. when we rush legislation, when we hold subcommittees and committees in the same day, when we push through legislation in the same week, when we time certain debate, we are not doing that. So I want to use the last few minutes that we have left to share stories from Iowans, because they deserve to be heard in this process. And it is my hope that if folks are present in this chamber, that they could listen to the concerns of people in our state who will be impacted. I'm writing today to express my strong opposition. I'm a lifelong resident of Iowa, and I've never seen an attempt to remove the civil rights from people in our state. This legislation would not protect anyone or solve any of the critical issues facing Iowans today. Instead, it would, among other provisions, strip transgender Iowans of protections under the Civil Rights Act and weaken protections for intersex and cisgender Iowans who don't fit gender norms. This is personal to me. I have a nephew who is transgender, and I love him very much. He doesn't live in Iowa, but visits us and my parents, his grandparents, several times a year. I am concerned he would no longer be safe in Iowa, since he would not have civil rights protections here. I'm also a pastor, and one of my parishioners has a child with XO chromosomes. Under this bill, their concern, and mine, is that their child would suffer deeply negative consequences because they don't fit into the gender binary prescribed by the law. They have indicated that they will move out of Iowa because of this legislation, which would be a profound loss not only to our congregation but to the whole community. This legislation does not create jobs, help grow our community or economy, or solve any number of issues facing Iowans today. Instead, it seems to be born out of fear and hatred that will hurt people. This bill does not reflect science or morality or compassion. From another parent. I am writing to ask you to protect the future of my baby daughter. I am pleading with you to consider the implications of this bill, to remove basic protections, because not all Iowans fall neatly into the bill's narrow definitions. My toddler is not transgender. She does, however, have a genetic variance that would classify her as intersex, a term you may not have heard and may not understand. You see, when my daughter was about 14 months old, she developed a hernia in her labia, and we discovered that she actually has testes and has 46 XY chromosome. Externally, she appears to be completely female, but her internal sexual organs do not match. My child is a beautiful little human, and everyone who meets her just gushes about how perfect she is. She loves bows and knacks and cars. She's a big fan of Lightning McQueen, whom she calls Queen. She shows empathy for others in ways I didn't realize was possible in a 20-month-old. I am terrified of what the future may hold for my daughter because of the things beyond her control. Because of her genetic variants and intersex traits, I don't know what gender she will identify with when she gets older. And as much as I love having a baby girl, I will cherish and love and protect my child no matter how she identifies. I fear that this world will not be so accepting and loving. This legislation weakens protections for intersex Iowans like my child. It makes it so that she would be unable to change her gender marker on her birth certificate if she ends up identifying as male, despite the fact that we had no idea she had XY chromosome when she was born. The bill sets a precedent for discrimination against anyone who doesn't fit into a gender binary. I know you are someone's child, just like she is mine. Every intersex Iowan and transgender Iowan is also someone's child, someone's baby. Please do not make existing in this state any harder than it already is for people who are different from what is considered normal. When it comes to being able to earn a living, have a place to live, or being served by a business or government office, no human should be discriminated against. Please vote no. And from a business owner, we own a small business that has served our community for the last 4 years. We employ 14 people, work diligently with other local businesses to boost our local economy, take an active role in community service through donations and volunteer work, and we offer extensive programming through many events. As a small business owner, we want to register our strong opposition to this bill, which, if passed, will have real economic impact on local businesses like ours. We have already lost an employee who decided to move to another state because of the Iowa's legislature's continuing targeting of transgender Iowans. When people do not feel wanted or safe in our state, why should they stay? The passage of this legislation would create a dangerous precedent. Not only would it alienate our transgender neighbors, it will also have all of us asking, who's next? Our state, simply put, cannot afford to lose talented people who do not wish to live in or visit a state that places little value on preserving the rights of its citizens. Small businesses like ours suffer when state potential employees who take their talents elsewhere, and tourism suffers when out-of-state artists and entertainers, like many who visit our store, decide they do not want to bring tourism dollars to Iowa. This bill is neither humane nor economically sound. And here is another family sharing a story of someone that you don't anticipate being impacted, but they could be. This bill poses significant dangers to transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, as well as anyone perceived as such. My wife is an example of the latter. Having gone through a double mastectomy because of breast cancer, many survivors choose to stay flat after the surgery since implants require longer recovery and pose an increased risk to infection, which is especially dangerous when chemotherapy needs to follow. Chemo has caused her hair to fall out. When in public, she receives scowls from people when she attempts to use the women's restroom. Gender identity needs to remain a protected class for everyone. For those who do not fit gender norms, as a lifelong Iowan, this legislation breaks my heart. As a former educator, I witnessed trans youth contemplate suicide and endure horrible bullying. They were desperate for safe places when they could be free to learn and be themselves just like all other kids. By providing safe spaces for them in school, I also got to see them thrive. As human beings, they deserve to be safe, just like we all do. My trans colleagues, friends, and former students are hurting right now. They are scared. No Iowan should feel like that because their government is trying to erase their existence. Please listen. Please open your heart to kindness. Please be brave and vote for human rights. The lives of many Iowans depend on you to do the right thing. And from a member of our community who's feeling threatened right now and unsafe. I was born and raised in Iowa. I have lived here my whole life. I remember a time when Iowa was leading the nation in civil rights. Today we are still a leader. And if this bill passes, we will be the first in the nation to remove the civil rights from our citizens. I'm not proud to call myself an Iowan right now. I'm a young professional. I work in marketing in the metro. Music and my family out of state. I don't want to be part of Iowa's brain drain, but I haven't been given much choice in the matter. In addition to the negative economic impact this legislation has on our state, I want you to consider the massive cost to taxpayers and litigation on this bill. Please vote no, and look to our state flag for guidance. Our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain. Colleagues, thank you to those who were listening.
Chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I received a letter from a doctor from the UIHC clinics. This is what she had to say. My name is Dr. Katie Emmerich, and I'm asking you to vote no on this bill. I am an Iowa educated and trained family medicine physician and lead a team of healthcare professionals who have cared for over 2,000 transgender and non-binary Iowans. We see folks from every corner of the state, from districts you represent. I have patients from Kossuth County, Guthrie Center, Humboldt, and even Sioux County. We have patients here today, right now, outside this room, screaming at the top of their lungs as if their life depends on it, because it does. As a doctor, I see firsthand how social determinants like this, like stable housing, employment, and access to public spaces are critical to patients' health. The protections in our Civil Rights Code are not abstract, they are lifelines. When a person is denied housing because of their gender identity, they face higher risks of homelessness, violence, and worsened physical and mental health. When they are fired from a job or turned away from business, it affects their ability to afford medications, access health care, and live with dignity. This bill is not about protecting the rights of women, but it is about taking away protections for an already marginalized group of people. The removal of civil rights from a population that already suffer from desperate health outcomes is a public health concern, and it will have real consequences for real people. Real Iowans, Representative Holt, have made it clear in the end game is to remove medical or Medicaid coverage for evidence-based and medically necessary gender-affirming care for adults. He has pointed to the $2 million Medicaid dollars that were paid over the past 10 years for this care. The problem with this math is that trans and non-binary people will still be here, despite your attempts to erase them. Only now they will have worsened health outcomes, more chronic diseases, more hospitalizations, and more costs to the system. To the taxpayers for whom you are purporting to be saving money. Please vote no.
The chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Walls.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to rise again because the sponsor of the legislation today, in our earlier conversation, mentioned that he had not thought about or considered the effects on employment for transgender Iowans or transgender Americans more broadly if they don't benefit from the protections of non-discrimination when it comes to employment. And so I wanted both for Senator Schultz's awareness and for the awareness of everybody in this chamber who is going to be voting on this legislation in the next 15 minutes, to hear some of the stories. These were collected by the Williams Institute, which is a research center at UCLA that specifically studies LGBTQ Americans and the challenges that they face. And Senator Schultz, I'm not sure if you're listening or not, but again, 70% of the respondents in this survey talked specifically about being discriminated against in the workplace. These are transgender employees, not just lesbian or bisexual or gay employees, but transgender employees specifically, talking about experiencing discrimination in the workplace. More specifically, approximately half of the transgender employees reported being fired, 54%, or not hired, 53%, because of being transgender. They were twice as likely to experience that compared to cisgender LGB folks, who were at 20 and 21% respectively, so being fired or not hired. And when the Williams Institute asked people specifically about what their experiences were, and they collected stories from all over the country. And the folks who are experiencing this discrimination, they don't just live, Senator, in Texas. I'm not totally sure how Senator Schultz got stuck on this idea of a bus in Austin, Texas. But there are people who are experiencing this discrimination in states like California, states like New York, like Pennsylvania, South Carolina. And Senator, if you'd like to learn more about this topic and how employment would be threatened for Iowans by learning from other states around the country, I would be happy to share this study so that we can look at that. And because when I mentioned earlier that the specific code the specific language in this bill is going to strike gender identity from protection in employment, I saw Senator Schultz shaking his head, kind of suggesting that was either not true or that isn't what would happen. But the reality is that the vast majority of transgender Americans do, in point of fact, experience discrimination or harassment or abuse in the workplace. And that is precisely why we need these protections in the Civil Rights Act so that when they experience that kind of discrimination or harassment, they have a legal remedy that this bill, Senate File 418, will deny transgender Iowans going forward. That's what will happen if this becomes law. And so when we talk specifically about how this is going to have a tangible impact in people's lives, I think that is the single biggest thing that is likely to change for Iowans if, or I suppose when, this becomes law. Right? They will no longer benefit from the employment protection that they enjoy today on February 27th. And when this takes effect over the summer, they will lose that protection. And so if they experience discrimination, if they're passed over for a promotion, if they're fired, if they're not hired, what would today be illegally, that remedy will be denied to them in the future. All of the other stuff that was discussed in the opening remarks and in some of the early discussion on the amendments, I mean, that's already being litigated in Iowa court. And to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any incidents occurring that countervail the laws that have passed previously. And that's why it feels like this legislation is specifically targeted at the three things that Senator Blake offered in amendments to try and address: the employment, the housing, and the access to credit. And even though the senator from Crawford had not thought about these issues before and whether or not transgender Iowans would be facing discrimination or harassment in the workplace, they are. And not just in Iowa, but all over the country. And that is precisely why we need these protections. And so, for senators to claim, for Republican senators to claim that there are no issues happening in these other states is simply false. It is simply false to suggest that there is no discrimination or harassment happening in the workplace across the country, or that transgender Americans living in those states would not benefit from protections, or that transgender Iowans living here do not currently benefit from those protections. That's why they're there. And so I hope that as my colleagues think about how they want to vote on this legislation, if they haven't already made up their minds, this is something that they'll think through seriously. And my hope, Senator Schultz, is that if or when we hear from transgender Iowans who do face discrimination in the workplace, when they face abuse or harassment in the workplace because of their gender identity, and we start to hear those stories later this year and next year, that you will listen to those Iowans. And that if they ask us to restore these protections in employment law, in housing protections, and access to credit, that you will be willing to work on those. Because you're telling, I heard the senator from Crawford say earlier during debate that that was not the primary focus of this legislation. And yet that is the practical implication, the practical impact of what is going to happen if Senate File 418 becomes law. And so, Senator, I'm going to send you this study. You don't have to read. I can't make you read it. It's only 38 pages. It's filled with a bunch of examples of Americans all over the country who are transgender. We're talking about sexual abuse, harassment, what have you, in the workplace because of their gender identity. Because this is a real problem. And it's something that we should take seriously. And so, Mr. President, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here by simply imploring my Republican colleagues to think again before they vote yes on a bill that is going to greenlight discrimination in employment, in housing, and access to credit. It's wrong.
The chair recognizes the senator from Blackhawk, Senator Dotzler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not one to ask people to get up and speak. In fact, I very seldom ever do that. But there's a point in reading the bill that I do have a question, and I'm going to ask Senator Schultz if he would yield to just a quick question.
Will the senator from Crawford, Senator Schultz, yield?
Yes.
Yes.
Order.
Thank you, Senator Schultz. Now, I'm not going to ask you to look this up because I'm going to read this to you. It's on page 14 of the bill, section 279.801A. And in that, And the question is this. The bill strikes the terminology gender identity and replaces it with gender theory. And I would like to ask you what is meant by gender theory versus identifying gender identity.
Now, I do know that that section exists, but I want to make sure I'm on the right. You said, did you say page 14?
Page 14, 279.801A.
Okay. That is in, I believe that is in the section of code for prohibited instruction. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yep. We as we go back to, I don't mean to go back to we're removing the words gender identity. Gender theory is what we are going to use in Iowa code for the instruction that is defined there in the code. I mean, it's in the rest of the paragraph, but we're removing the words gender identity and replacing it in code.
Okay, so what does theory mean? I mean, it's something that hasn't ever been proven or doesn't exist, or
There's something to that.
Like Bigfoot's kind of a theory. The
I grew up with I grew up with the theory of evolution.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, I don't know how you can call it a theory. I wouldn't call a person that I grew up with in grade school who knew he was different, always identified himself as a female, and was harassed most of his life till he committed suicide. And I wouldn't call it a theory that this individual was an electrician that worked at John Deere, who really believed he was a woman. And I would see him in the summertime down to my mother's tavern, walking down the street wearing a dress. And he believed he was a woman so much, it wasn't a theory to him. And he wanted to be a woman so much that he took it upon himself to remove one of his testicles. And then he did it again to get rid of the second one. And in the process of being a woman and not being a theory, he bled to death. Now, I wouldn't call that some kind of theory. It's what this person's mind was when he was born and lived through it every day, and he didn't choose to change his identity because he was taught somehow. This isn't a theory. These are people's lives and how they are born. And when we get back to our prayers in Jesus, and we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance for liberty and justice for all, somehow you don't think that transgender people are people, because they're not all. What are we doing to become the very first state in the nation to back up on human rights? And now that you're doing it, you made it worse than if they would have ever been there, because the legislature is saying now it's okay to discriminate against this specific group of people. It's okay because you just changed the law to say that they don't have protections anymore. Shame on you.
A point of order, I'm going to recognize Senator Weiner from Johnson in a moment, but be aware that we're approaching 3:30, and at 3:30 I will stop debate and we will go to the vote. With that, the chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Weiner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to read one letter that came in today that I think is worthwhile listening to. It was from someone who hoped to speak this morning at the public hearing, and Phone calls. So many phone calls. By 9 years old, I was an expert at taking messages. Sometimes the constituent caller, desperate for someone to listen to them, would even talk to me. I now know how they felt. I'm desperate for the members of today's legislature to listen to me and so many others when we tell you that being trans is real. We may not understand, but it's very real, and trans people experience discrimination. It's why gender identity was finally added to the Iowa Civil Rights Code nearly 20 years ago. My identity not when you took away her right to see the doctor she knew and trusted, and not now. She is who she says she is. I am here to plead for her protection. I am here as a daughter who has always revered the sacred duty of being a representative of the public you serve. Before you vote on legislation about trans people, make sure you are listening to them. You can come to dinner at our house if you don't know anyone else. But if you are about to vote to take away someone's rights and you haven't spoken at length to them, you are not doing your job. I urge you to vote no on this harmful bill. And she says the dinner invitation is real.
Seeing no other discussion, I'm going to recognize Senator Schultz, but it's only very briefly, Senator, so only a minute or two, and then we're going to go to the vote. So
Very good.
With that.
Very well, Mr. President. And at any moment, you can just simply say stop. But I do have a few things I'd like to say. Just responses to a few items, all level voiced and nothing radical. But it was stated that legally true disorder, disability, it falls under federal law. Part of the point is that a lot of what we're talking about is a change made on the day. That's how we end up with guys deciding that I'm going to walk into the bathroom, the locker room, and superintendents saying that I don't have any choice. I have to let him, even though yesterday...
Senator Schultz, I am going to interrupt. Thank you. Pursuant to the time certain motion Debate is now closed, and Senate File 418 will be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Secretary will read.
Senate File 418, a bill for equity sex and gender, including those in related terms for purposes of statutory construction, education, parts of sex, and certain vital records generated under the Iowa Civil Rights Act and school curriculum related to gender theory, being enacted by the General Assembly, State of Iowa.
The senator from Crawford moves that the reading thus far be considered the last reading of the bill. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Open the voting system and receive your vote. Rule 23 has been called. The Secretary will read the roll.
No, you're good. Senator Bennett. No. Bennett votes no. I'm going to have you repeat how she votes for the record.
Senator Bennett votes no.
Senator Bisignano.
No. Senator Senator Lofgren votes aye.
Senator Quirmbach.
No. Senator Quirmbach votes no.
Senator Rowley.
Aye. Senator Rowley votes aye.
Senator Rosenboom.
Senator Rosenboom votes aye.
Senator Shipley.
Aye. Senator Shipley votes aye.
Senator Taylor.
Senator Taylor votes aye.
Senator Walls.
No. Senator Walls votes no.
Senator Weiner.
Senator Weiner votes no.
Senator Zumbaugh.
Senator Zumbaugh votes aye. Has every senator voted? Every senator has voted. The Secretary will close the voting system. The Secretary will lock the voting system and record your votes. The Senate will pay attention to Senator Whitford moves to immediately message Senate File 418. I ask unanimous consent to immediately message Senate File 418. Seeing no objections, so ordered. It's now the time of day for points of personal privilege. Do any senators seek the floor? We'll ask security to remove the people from the balcony, please.
Come get me, asshole! You're a fucking Nazi! Come get me if you want.
Troopers. Please remove. The Senate will be in order. The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 18, I move this call of the Senate be lifted.
You've all heard the motion. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The call is lifted. It's now that time of day for points of personal privilege. Is anyone seeking the floor? Senator Lynn, Senator from Lynn, Senator Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I start my actual personal point of privilege, I'm going to state some information that was sent to me today. So there are 6,850 registered sex offenders in the state of Iowa. 97.2 of those are men. 86.4 of them are white men. So if we are trying to protect women and children in this state, we need better laws that protect them against these predators, and those are white men, cis men, not transgender. Ladies and gentlemen, history does not just record, is not just a record of what has happened. It is a mirror that reflects who we are, who we were, and who we strive to be. It judges the choices that we make, the injustices we tolerate, and the courage we either embrace or reject. And time again, history has shown us that the painful truth. Those who stand against justice, against equality, against the dignity of every human being, they find themselves on the wrong side of history. Think of the voices that once spoke out against abolition, against women's suffrage, against desegregation. They clung to fear, to prejudice, to an illusion of superiority. They claimed tradition, law, even God himself as justification for that oppression. But today, their words ring hollow. Their names, even if remembered, are not celebrated but condemned. Because no argument, no matter how passionately made, can stand the test of time when it is built on the foundation of denying other persons their humanity. In our own time, we are not immune to this same failure. We see leaders and citizens alike resisting progress, clinging to systems that harm rather than heal, defending policies that divide rather than unite. Whether it's radical justice, LGBTQ plus rights, the rights of immigrants, or the fight against economic and environmental injustices. Every generation faces a choice. We either choose justice or we choose complicity. And make no mistake, silence is a choice. Indifference is a choice. Today, you all made your choice. But here is the power that we hold. History is still being written, and we are still its authors. We can choose to be the ones who march forward, who demand change, who refuse to let their generations look back on us with shame. We can decide right now that we will not be the voices of intolerance, the hands that build barriers, the hearts that turn away. So today we may have lost a battle, but